Hey, Built Possible community.
Hey,
Ann and Tadra coming to you today. We are first and foremost so grateful to all of you who joined us for our watch party for our season one episode, the last one, Sisterhood. It was a great time. And
it
there were so
was.
many of you in the room. Some of you even got to come on camera and join Tadra and I in questions and comments. And so we really, really appreciate you.
Thank
Uh,
you
so,
so much.
so yes, we wanted to come on though because we got a really interesting comment from one of our sisters who joined us. And so we wanted
Thank you
to
so
address it. And so here's what it is. The conversation was evolving, and it was really around this idea of noticing progress as she's moved up in her organization. And she termed it as having getting her seat at the table, so to speak. And she was saying how once she started to progress through the organization, she started to notice that people that look like her, so basically, other perhaps women, Black women in particular, really hadn't been advocating as she thought they were. And so this was a really interesting thing for us to talk about because I know both Tadra and I have experienced it. And so, Tadra, do you want to give some thoughts on how you saw this comment and your experience for our viewers? And then we'd love to hear from you all as well.
Okay, so I just want to echo Ann's sentiments and just thank you all so much for making the Built Possible watch party so special, and for rocking with us and riding with us along this journey. Taping season one and hearing your feedback has just been so incredible for us. And we just look forward to continuing to build this community with you, even as we look forward to all the things that will happen with, through Built Possible. But on this topic of advocacy, I think this is a really interesting and important topic. I think about advocacy, especially amongst the sisterhood, and the mindset that we may bring into situations, and then what we may be expecting from our sisters or from people who look like us. First of all, my experience has been that the mindset around advocacy can sometimes be that we are leaning on or looking to others to be our advocates. And it's important in organizations to have sponsors. It's important in organizations to have mentors. Those two people are really critical in helping you with advancing. But it's also important to ensure that you understand the story that's being told about you. We talk about that in one of the episodes, and that you build the skill of advocating for yourself. And this gets more and more critical as you elevate within organizations. As you get your seat at the table, there may not be as many voices that are speaking for you, but Anne talks about agency all the time. You have the power and agency to speak for yourself. And so setting aside the mindset or understanding what your mindset is around advocacy, what you have, whatever that belief is that you have brought into your particular role, and then being able to make any adjustments so that you get very comfortable with talking about what it is that you've done, being able to build those alliances and relationships even outside of those formal meeting structures, and getting really comfortable with ensuring that the organization understands your storyline and what you are going to say about yourself, and not necessarily delegating that responsibility solely to the people that you may be looking to. There's another discussion perhaps around within the sisterhood, and we talk about the fact that there is room for all of us. So, Anne, even as we think about, people who look like us advocating for us, I'd love for you to share more about this idea that there is room for all of us as one who has the ability to advocate for others.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole idea of, well, the first thing we have to guard ourselves against as sisters, as Black women in organizations where we are one of a few or maybe the only, is buying into this idea of scarcity and the fact that there can only be one of us, or, only one of us will prevail if there's a situation that happens. And I think that shows up a lot for us because maybe because we're so used to being the only that it almost becomes natural for us to think we're likely to be the only. And maybe even we play that out in some way, shape, or form, not intentionally, but maybe even unconsciously.
Yeah.
But I think the other piece is when you get to be in a leadership position in particular, and leadership can come in different forms. I don't just mean you are the manager of someone, that may be one version of it, but you may be leading a project with other folks on your team that are maybe peers. You're in a peer group of folks around you, and there's another sister in particular who might be a part of that. or even brother for that matter. But point being, someone else for whom you share a common background and maybe some common challenges that you faced. It is really important that we guard against that scarcity mentality and not showing up as if only one of us can be the shining star or the prevailer in this situation. And I think that when you get to be in those positions, not giving up your power, we talked about this on the call. Sometimes we think because we're the only, we don't have power. Our voice is somehow diminished because we're only one voice. And I'm a firm believer that one voice can absolutely change the world. And that you've seen it in history, and maybe it's been a very powerful voice, but yours is just as powerful. I think
Absolutely.
realizing that in a corporate environment and not being fearful of the repercussions, because the other thing I talked about is one thing organizations are in desperate need of is strong leadership. And when you show up and you are comfortable and confident in your convictions and you've done the appropriate work to understand a situation, not on me going there blindly and just, pop off, so to speak, but you've done the appropriate thought process. You've done some, even maybe some behind the scenes, building some alliances and allies, whatever the case may be. Show up in your full self with your full agency. And even if you're fearful when you walk into that room and bring your courage and your agency to advocate not only for yourself, but for others in that room who might be that single voice that you've once been. Because without that, we're just succumbing to maybe some beliefs that we have about an organization and, maybe even our own fears about our own security in a role or in an organization. And that's going to show up in other things, I guarantee you. People want leaders. And if you want to continue to progress and even get promoted, your leadership needs to show up at all times. And you speaking up for folks who might not have a voice or maybe aren't as confident means something, or you're going through a difficult situation, you speaking up on your principles will always, always be more important than buying into someone else's perception. And I say that unequivocally because, at the end of the day, that's the reality of who you should be as a leader. And I say should in quotation marks because you can be whatever kind of leader you want to be. But if that's how you want to show up and be a positive force for change in the world, then that's the kind of leadership you should bring.
I love that. Absolutely. Stand in the fullness of your agency. And I love what you said about organizations are desperate for strong leaders. And we have to remember that when we've been given a seat at the table, or when we are even aspiring to have that seat at the table, we are built possible. Like we do this exercise where we reinforce what it means to be built possible. And as you think about, if you're in a situation where you're either looking for advocacy or maybe you haven't, maybe you've been hesitant about advocating for yourself, I want you to go back and do some reflection on how you're built. And I want you to remind yourself of how we need to remind ourselves that we are built worthy, that we are built brilliant, that we are built, to sit at the table, and that we are built possible. And so any work that you may need to do to understand the story that you are telling yourself, to unpack that story, and then to ensure that your story is not limiting you. This is episode 1, that your story is not limiting you, but you are allowing the stories that need to be told, talking about what's in your mind to remind you that you're built for this moment, and then do the work to lay out the things that you want to say, that you need to say, that the organization needs to hear about you, and strategize on how you'll get that message out, how you will do your self advocacy, and the partners that you will align and support to help you in doing that. And always remember that you're built possible.